Housing is one of the most pressing and one of the most contentious issues in this state. Little surprise then that one of the propositions on the ballot this fall has to do with rent control. As part of our continuing coverage, Decision 2020, the SoCal Impact, we delve now into Proposition 21. Here to break it down for us is Jackie Botts of CalMatters. Jackie, it's great to have you back with us.
Great to be here. Thanks.
All right, so why don't we just go over the very basics of Prop 21. If it's passed, what would it do?
So essentially, it would allow cities to pass stricter local rent control measures than they can currently. And there is some backstory here. Back in 1995, California passed a law that severely restricted what types of housing cities could pass rent control on. They couldn't cap rent increases on single-family homes, condos, vacant units, or housing occupied after 1995. So what this would do was it would allow cities to be able to pass rent control on almost all housing as long as it's more than 15 years old. And the exception is landlords who own 2 or fewer single-family properties.
And I heard a clarification of that last part that I'd love to share with our audience, because this one came as a surprise to me. If you own and live in a house, that counts as your 2. So mom and pop is really limited here. If you live in one house and you own another, that's it. After that, you are no longer mom and pop. As you mentioned, Jackie, there are some roots with this, with the Costa-Hawkins Act back in 1995. But as people are looking through their ballot guides and they're reading through this, they might have another sense of deja vu around this. We voted on something similar not that far ago. Tell me a little bit about what happened then and how this proposition is different.
Yeah, Prop 21 will look really similar to Prop 10 from 2018. That prop would have wholesale repealed the 1995 Costa-Hawkins law, letting cities enact rent control as they please. Voters were against it by a wide margin, 60-40, and the restrictions on local rent control remained. And we can get into the arguments for and against in a second to explain why voters were against it last time. Now, a few things have changed since Prop 10 lost in 2018. For one thing, California lawmakers passed a statewide law capping yearly rent increases around 8% for most housing, and it's the strictest rent control law in the nation. But the backers of the 2018 propositions said that state law doesn't go far enough. It only caps the most egregious types of rent increases, and they say cities need to be able to crack down even further on rent increases, cap them at, say, 3% or 5%. So they came back with Prop 21, but it doesn't go as far as Prop 10 did. So it does not apply to all housing. It limits it to housing that is more than 15 years old. And there is this carve out for mom and pop landlords. They won't be affected by local rent control laws.
It's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of history. As you mentioned, I think the next natural place to go to is really breaking down who's in favor of it, who's against it, and why. So let's start off with the supporters. Who is backing Proposition 21 and what arguments are they making?
Yeah, we've got some big names. Bernie, U.S. Rep. Maxine Waters, the California Democratic Party, several big unions, the ACLU of Southern California. The biggest character of all is a sort of controversial LA local firebrand character, Michael Weinstein. He's the president of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. It's a health organization, but it has increasingly stepped into advocacy and put a lot of dollars into state and local LA ballot drives over the past 8 years. He backed Prop 10 in 2018, the similar rent control model that failed, and he's backing this one. Now, the arguments for are that supporters say this will prevent more homelessness and gentrification, an undeniable problem in a state where the cost of living is ridiculous. In California, renters typically pay 70% more than renters in other states, and the rent is growing rapidly. So they say this is about corporate landlords who are making big bucks off of powerless tenants and can change the faces of neighborhoods by raising rent, pushing out old tenants, bringing in higher paying new tenants, and all the while increasing homelessness. And so they say cities need all the tools they can get to regulate these Goliaths in a David versus Goliath sort of situation.
And then what about the opponents? Who is saying this is not the way to deal with California's housing problem, and why?
The opposition has a lot of associations that represent construction, builders, landlords. It also includes real estate corporations as well as some senior advocacy groups and the California NAACP State Conference. Perhaps the most important recent installment is a new, very prominent character who's opposing Prop 21, and that is Governor Gavin Newsom. He announced his opposition recently, and what he said essentially sums up what the opposition is saying. He said that, first of all, last year's rent control law went far enough. It's the strictest in the nation. But he also said, and I quote, Prop 21, like Prop 10 before it, runs the all too real risk of discouraging availability of affordable housing in our state. And so this is what the opposition say. They say that it might seem like allowing your city to pass stricter rent control in your neighborhood will have an impact on a local level, but in the long run, it's going to discourage more building, and more building of more housing is what California needs right now. In the long run, this is going to be worse for low-income tenants, is what they say. Plus, they say voters already rejected it.
Yes, and that's been a very common refrain from those who oppose Prop 21. Jackie, can you explain a little bit more? Because I think that's the hard part for some people to wrap their heads around, especially because this rent control would not apply to buildings that are 15 years old or newer. So can you kind of explain a bit more about those who make the argument that this would really be an impediment to future affordable housing?
Right, absolutely. So it's well documented that California has a severe shortage of housing. When Governor Newsom came into office, he made some big promises about wanting to expand the rate of building of housing rapidly. More housing for the same amount of people means that theoretically the price goes down. So this is really a free market economics argument. And let me tell you, it's a balancing act. Too much rent control will undeniably further restrict building in a free market economy if landlords and builders aren't able to make revenue enough to incentivize them to do it. On the other hand, gentrification and displacement are undeniable trends in big cities. And as there often is, there are studies on both sides of this. There is evidence that rent control does slow the rate of building, but there's also evidence, for example, in Los Angeles, that local rent control hasn't slowed building. Then again, people will say in the Bay Area it has. So it's hard to find the ground truth on this issue.
It's a very complicated issue, and we just have a few moments left here, Jackie, but I'd love to get your thoughts on, supporters of this and the creators of this proposition have been working on it for quite some time before COVID-19, but COVID-19 has just brought the issue of rent just so forefront in so many people's minds. Do you think COVID-19 might affect the fate of this ballot measure?
That's a great question. If you're late on rent, this Prop 21 isn't going to change your situation or keep you from getting evicted next year. However, the pandemic may well have changed people's feelings about their landlords. The financial shock triggered by the coronavirus pandemic may make people more eager to protect renters. People who want to cancel the rent might also want their cities to be able to further restrict landlords from raising the rent egregiously in future years. On the other hand, let me share with you a poll that just came in this morning. It showed that just 37% of likely voters are supporting Proposition 21 right now. That is fewer than voted for it in 2018. There is still 26% who are undecided, but backers will face a tough hurdle in getting those undecided voters on their side by November.
Jackie Botts of CalMatters, thanks so much.
Thank you.